Amy Bender's The Rememberer probes the concept of de-evolution in a fresh and vital way. A piece of speculative fiction, the story steps away from realism to explore what happens when de-evolution is literalized. Annie, the protagonist, recounts the plight of her lover Ben, who's rapidly de-evoluting from human to baboon to salamander. Ben laments the way humans are changing. He says, "Annie, don't you see? We're all getting too smart. Our brains are just getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And the world dries up and dies, and there's too much thought and not enough heart." This de-evolution is perhaps an involuntary reaction to this idea, a way to recapture the heart and life. But for when exactly is he nostalgic? Was there ever a time at which humans lived by their hearts? Or when other species did? What waits in our evolutionary past but pure instinct and drive and survival? The Rememberer by Amy Bender. My lover is experiencing reverse evolution, and I tell no one. I don't know how it happened, only that one day he was my lover, and the next he was some kind of ape. It's been a month, and now he's a sea turtle. I keep him on the counter in a baking pan filled with salt water. "Ben," I say to the small, pouting head, "can you understand me?" And he stares with these eyes like little droplets of tar, and I drip tears into the pan, a sea of me. He is shedding 1,000,000 years a day, and I am no scientist, but this is roughly what I figured out. I went to the old biology teacher at the community college and asked him for an approximate timeline of our evolution. He was irritated at first. He wanted money. So I told him I'd be happy to pay him, and he cheered up quite a bit. I can hardly read this timeline that he gave me, and because he should have typed it, and it turned out to be wrong anyways. According to him, the whole process should take about a year, but from the way things are going, I think we have less than a month left. At first, people called the phone and asked me where Ben was. Why wasn't he at work? Why did he miss his lunch meeting with his clients? His out-of-print special-ordered book on civilization has arrived at the library. Would he please pick it up? I told him he was sick, a strange disease, and to please stop calling. And the odd thing is they eventually did. They stopped calling. After a week, the phone was silent, and Ben, the baboon, sat in a corner by the window, wrapped up in drapery, chattering to himself. Last I saw him human, he was so sad about the world. This was not unusual. He was always sad about the world. It was a large reason why I loved him. We'd sit together and be sad and think about being sad and sometimes discuss that sadness. On his last human day, he said, "Annie, don't you see? We're all getting too smart. Our brains are just getting bigger and bigger, and the world dries up, and then it dies when there's no thought and not enough heart." He looked at me pointedly, blue eyes unwavering. "Like us, Annie, we think far too much." I sat down, and I remember the first time we had sex. I left the lights on, kept my eyes wide open, and concentrated really hard on letting go. Then I noticed that his eyes were open too. And in the middle of taking off my clothes, we sat on the floor and had an hour-long conversation about poetry. It was all very peculiar, but it was all very familiar. Another time he woke me up in the middle of the night, lifted me off of the blue sheets, and led me outside to the stars and whispered, "Look, Annie, look. There's no space for anything but dreaming." I listened sleepily, wandered back to bed, and found myself wide awake, staring at the ceiling, unable to dream at all. Ben, on the other hand, he fell asleep right away. But I crept back outside. I tried to dream up to the stars, but I didn't know how to do that. I tried to find a star that no one in history had ever wished on before and wondered what would happen if I did. On his last human day, he put his head in his hands and sighed, and I stood up and kissed the entire back of his neck, covered that flesh, made wishes there because I knew no woman had ever been so thorough, had ever kissed every inch of his skin. I quoted him. What did I wish for? I wished for good. And that's all. Just good. My wishes became generalized long ago. In childhood, I learned quick the consequence of specific wishing. I took him in my arms and I made love to him, my sad man. See, we're not thinking, I whispered into his ear while he kissed my neck. We're not thinking at all, and he pressed his head into my shoulder and held me tighter. Afterwards, we went outside again. There was no moon and the night was dark. He said he hated talking and just wanted to look into my eyes and tell me everything that way. I let him, and it made my skin tight. The things in his look. Then he told me he wanted to sleep outside for some reason, and in the morning when I woke up, I looked out to the patio and there was an ape sprawled on the cement, great furry arms covering his head to block out the sun from the glare. Even before I saw his eyes, I knew it was him. And once we were face to face, he gave me the same sad look, and I just hugged those enormous shoulders. I didn't even really care then, not at first. I didn't panic and I didn't call 911. I sat with him outside and smoothed the fur on the back of his hand. When he reached for me, I said no loudly, and he seemed to understand and he pulled back. I have limits here. We sat on the lawn together and ripped up the grass. I didn't miss human Ben right away. I wanted to meet the ape too, and to take care of my lover like a son, a pet. I wanted to know him every possible way, but I didn't realize he wasn't coming back. Now, I come home from work and look for this regular-sized shape walking around and worrying, and I realize over and over that he's gone. I pace the halls. I chew an entire pack of gum in mere minutes. I review my memories and make sure they're still intact, because if he's not here, then it's my job. It's my job to remember. I think of the way he wrapped his arms around my back and held me so tight, and it made me nervous, and the way his breath felt in my ear. Right. When I go to the kitchen, I peer into the pan and see he's some kind of salamander now. He's small. Ben, I whisper, do you remember me? Do you remember? His eyes roll up in his head and I dribble honey into the water. He used to love honey. He looks at it and then swims up to the other end of the pan. This is the limit of my limits. Here it is. You don't ever know for sure where it is, and then you bump against it and bam, you're there. Because I cannot bear to look down into the water anymore and not be able to find him at all. To search the tiny waves with the microscope lens and to locate my lover, the one-celled wonder, bloated and blind, brainless and benign, heading clear and small, like an eye floater into nothingness. I put him in the passenger seat of my car and drive him to the beach. Walking down on the sand, I nod at the people on their towels, laying their bodies in the sun and wishing. At the water's edge, I stoop down and place a whole pan at the tip of a little tiny baby wave. It floats well. A cooking boat for someone to find washed up on shore and to make cookies in. A lucky catch for a poor soul with all the ingredients, but no container. Ben, the salamander, he swims out, and I wave to the water with both of my hands, big enough for see if he ever looks back. I turn around and walk back to the car. Sometimes I think he'll wash up on the shore, a naked man with a startled look who has been to history and back. I keep my eyes on the newspaper. I make sure my number is listed. I walk around the block at night in case he doesn't quite remember which house it is. I feed the birds outside, and sometimes before I put oneself to bed, I place my hands around my skull to see if it's growing and wonder what, of any use, would fill it if it did.